everyone come in here, just give them a minute to get connected.
Good afternoon, all.
Good afternoon, Harvey.
Good afternoon, Harvey, my man.
Hello, Stanley. How are you? Hi,
Good.
Rochelle.
Fine. What else we got here?
I'm going to go ahead and mute everyone, and then I'm going to get started. Welcome everyone today to this Muirwood Center program with Rachel Zolotov. We also are sponsored today by the Saul Brodsky Jewish Community Library. Rachel was born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri, and is first generation American born into a Belarusian family. Rachel has a passion for antique jewelry, art, reading, cooking, and history. She started her career as a gemologist and jewelry designer and studied hand engraving in Austria. After the birth of her children, Rachel felt the desire to research her own lineage and was inspired to uncover the puzzle pieces of the journey her ancestors had taken during World War II. She wrote The Girl with the Silver Star in hopes of teaching and sharing what she discovered with future generations. In her free time, you can find her snuggling up with a good book and a large cup of tea. Rachel lives in St. Louis, Missouri with her husband and her two beautiful daughters. And if you wish to learn more, please visit her website, which is rachelzolotov.com. Welcome, Rachel, and we really appreciate having you here today.
Thank you so much. I am super excited to be here today with you guys. If you guys are ready, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I have a little presentation to go along as I talk. I'm just going to pull that up here. All right. Can you see that okay?
Yes, I can.
Awesome. All right, I'm just going to move this over here. Just one second. There we go. All right, I am ready. So as you guys heard, my name is Rachel and I am the author of The Girl with the Silver Star. I wanted to thank you all for joining me today. I'm so excited and truly honored to share about my novel and my journey of how I sort of uncovered the details and how I went about writing it. So let's go ahead and start. So I'd like to start off sort of sharing a little bit about myself and my family. You might have heard some of it already in the introduction, but I'm going to go a little bit deeper into it. I was born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri. I started my career in the jewelry business. I went to the Gemological Institute of America to become a gemologist and a jewelry designer. After I finished that, I studied abroad in Austria with a master gun engraver for hand engraving. And then I came back to St. Louis, which I must say was very difficult. But I did come back to St. Louis because I had my family here waiting for me. And I was part owner at my parents' store, which is called Timekeepers. It's a watch and jewelry store. And I was there for about 10 years. And then 9 years ago, I decided to focus on my jewelry designing and also be a stay-at-home mom with my daughter. And then about 4 years ago, I started writing my novel and then published that in November of 2020. I just recently started a new career in the UX field as a user experience designer. So I would say I've always been a creative person, drawing, coloring, designing, writing. That's always been sort of there, but writing a novel is not something that I ever thought that I was going to do or sort of had in my mind. I've always been an avid reader of World War II novels, especially, and historical fiction. but I never had thought that I was going to write a book. It just sort of fell into my lap. But I'm so happy that it fell into my lap because it's been such a rewarding and great experience that I never would have imagined. I have two girls you can see here in the photo. Sasha, who is my oldest one, she's going to be 10 soon. And then Leah, who just turned 6. My husband is from Moscow. We met in high school. We both went to Clayton High, and we started dating 21 years ago. And we have been married for 14 years. We do speak Russian at home with our girls. Let's see what else. We both love to travel, especially to Europe. We've been to over 50 European cities, and we do travel with our girls pre-COVID. We did a lot of traveling with them. And you can see here in our photos, this was actually us in Spain. So let's see here. We love hiking on the weekends with the family, and I love tea. I have a whole cupboard full of tea. So yes, you can find me drinking tea at all times. I always have a cup with me. So that is a little bit about me. Now I would like to share a little bit about my family and how they came to the United States. So although my novel is based on the true story of my great-grandparents' journey during World War II, my parents' story and their journey coming to the US has played a huge part in my upbringing and the stories that I heard growing up. So they came here, they had the opportunity to leave Belarus with the help of the Jewish Federation in 1979. And they came here with my 2 older sisters, who at the time were 1.5 and 5.5. They arrived with 2 suitcases and $50. They traveled through Italy, and it took them about 3 months to come here. And then I was born in 1985. So why did they leave Belarus? Well, 2 major reasons: opportunity and freedom. Under the communist regime, it was very difficult for them to make ends meet and provide a life that I think my parents wanted for us. They wanted something more. They wanted to be able to make something of themselves, and they couldn't do that there. Also, being Jewish and living there was difficult. There was many stories that my parents told me over the years. I think that after World War II, there was a bitterness and a hatred that continued for many years, and the Jewish people were blamed for the war. So that was a huge part in why they wanted to come here. So as I said, growing up, I heard many stories of what life was like before my parents left. And some of these stories are somehow weaved into my novel. The hardships that my family faced, I think, have impacted me very much, and they've helped shape me into the person that I am. And I'm so thankful that my parents were able to come to the US and have worked so hard to be able to provide me with the life that I have today. This is actually a picture here of my dad. His name is Simone. As I said, he's a watchmaker. And then my mom on the right, this was them back in Russia. She was a baker. And then when they immigrated here, and after a few years, they opened their store. My mom went to work with my dad, and she's been with him there ever since. On the right is a more recent picture of my parents with my daughter. Just a fun fact, they actually got placed here in St. Louis because there was a need for a watchmaker. So they didn't choose St. Louis, it was sort of chosen for them. So, but we're glad that we're here. So about 10 years later, after very many hardworking days and nights, my parents sponsored the entire rest of the family that was still living in Belarus and brought all 18 of them here to St. Louis. I was 4 years old when they arrived here in St. Louis. So here in the picture, among those 18 was my great-grandmother, Raisa, and she is the main character of my novel. The picture to the right is my grandmother Luba and my grandfather, and I'm there in the middle in a little red dress. And then that's another picture of me off to the left. I spent many weekends and summers with my grandparents. They lived in the Covenant house before they passed away. And it was during those times that I learned to speak Russian. When they came, they didn't know very much English. And at home at the time, I spoke, a little bit of Russian with my parents and understood some of it, all of it, but some of it I couldn't really speak. So it was really here where I learned that I needed to speak more Russian so my grandparents could understand me. So I feel like by spending all of that time with them and the other Russians who lived in the Covenant house, I was able to observe their culture and the Russian mannerisms, which I feel I was able to, it helped me portray those in my novel. So a little bit more about The Girl with the Silver Star. Here's my book. The novel is very near and dear to my heart, obviously, since it was inspired by the true story of my great-grandparents. And I would like to introduce the book to you by reading just the first 2 paragraphs. So, Chapter 1, The Clutches of War, June 23rd, 1941, Minsk, Belarus. Sophia sat with our packed bags next to the door, her head down and jet black curls covering her face. I made my way over to her and asked if she was all right, knowing what the answer would be before I asked it. She looked up and with tears swelling up in her chestnut brown eyes, she said, "Mama, I'm scared. I don't want to leave home. Where will we go?" "I know, Sophia, but you heard your papa. It's not safe for us here. The Nazis could be headed our way. Come get into bed. Tomorrow morning we will leave for Bobrusk. You'll get to see your baba and Dieta." "Wouldn't it be nice to see your grandparents?" I asked as I shuffled Sophia to her bed. So that's just a little introduction. Raisa obviously is my great grandmother. She's the main character, and her 2 girls, Luba and Sophia. And then my great grandfather's name was Abraham. So the book really follows Raisa and the family from June of 1941 all the way through to the end of the war. It's about the harrowing journey and the trials of war, but it's also really about the love and the hope that Raisa carries with her. Raisa's story focuses on the women around her, her mother, her sisters, her daughters, the friends that she makes along the way. This bond and the strength that they shared is really what keeps them going during these difficult years. We don't always think about the heroes of the war being the women. We think of the men who fought on the front lines, but we sometimes forget that the women who were left behind with their families to, journey many miles and, be immersed in new cultures and have to take care of their children and the elderly, they were heroes as well. So my book really puts a highlight and a shine on that. Another thing about my book is several of the chapters dive into the past and give a taste of what life was like before the war. As I said, it is based on the true story of my great-grandmother, but because I wasn't able to ask her about these stories or my grandma, and I had to solely rely on my mother, I had to fictionalize parts of it, but everything that I could have based on the truth was based on truth from letters and original documents and stories that were passed down. The bits that were fictionalized were things that could have actually happened during those time periods. So I wanted to make sure that everything was historically accurate. Let's see here. All right. Okay, there we go. So let's dive a little deeper into sort of uncovering the past and how I was, how I went about asking those questions and getting into that research. So about 4 years ago, I began asking those questions, which really led me into about a year of just researching. Then it took me about a year and a half. My daughter was young, so I was writing during nap times. And then I spent about 6 months editing and revising. And then after polishing my manuscript, I began the journey into publishing. So everything sort of started after I finished reading a book called The Nightingale. I realized that I had read hundreds of books about World War II, and I didn't know anything about my own family history. And I was wondering why do I not know stories? What happened to my grandparents or my great-grandparents during the war? Were they affected? So I called my mom and I just started asking her questions, saying, why do I not know anything? What happened to them? And my mom sort of explained that she only knew a little bit because it really wasn't something that was talked about. It was difficult times, difficult years, and her parents just didn't really want to talk about it. And so she didn't know very much. And the little that she did know fit onto about a page of notes. But once I got off the phone with her and I started looking into the things that she had told me, and I realized that she had fled Minsk with her 2 daughters and ended up 4,000 kilometers away in Uzbekistan. I knew that I needed to see if I could find more information, if I could uncover those puzzle pieces and dig a little deeper. So what I did was I started searching, and at first, I think that thirst for information came from me just wanting to be able to share that with my girls. And then it became, well, I want to write this down for my girls. I want to keep it. I want to write this history down and share it with them. And then as the research progressed and I started writing, it became, well, this is more than just a story that I could share with my kids. This is a story that I could share with the world, a story that I could put out there for people to learn and understand and remember. And so that is how I got to where I am now. The story just began to unfold, and I understood that I needed to do that. So the first place that I started looking was an amazing resource called jewishgen.org. And according to their site, approximately 1 million former Soviet Union Jews were evacuated or fled themselves to Uzbekistan and neighboring areas before the German troops entered their cities. They estimate as many as 300,000 deportees perished from disease and starvation, while some died in the line of fire serving their country. Amazingly, 152,000 registration cards, like the one that you're seeing on the screen, were digitized, and a database has been made available with those names and digital images of the registration cards that arrived in Tashkent between 1941 and 1942. And I was very excited to find my great-grandmother's registration card was among them. So you'll see here, this is her registration card, and the right-hand side lists her children and how old they are, their date of birth, and then in the bottom left has got the address where they were living, which was the Fergana region in Uzbekistan, which is south of Tashkent. So from there, I started to dive a little deeper, and I started doing searches for all of the known relatives that I had uncovered at that time. So as I dove a little deeper, I ended up finding the registration cards for Raisa's parents and her sisters, who also listed the same address and the same date that they entered, which confirmed that they had traveled together to Tashkent. Next, I started reaching out to relatives. And then Sophia's son, Adik, he lives in Chicago. He sent me a wonderful gift. I'm going to show it to you here. This is a binder full of the letters that Abraham sent to Raisa during the war. And as soon as I received it, I knew that I had an incredible piece of history in my hands. I'm going to show you, one of the pages is falling out, so I'm going to show it to you a little bit more up close. So this is one of the letters. They didn't have envelopes. So what it is here is it would just fold, and this is how it would send in the mail. On the front here is an image of a soldier on the battlefield. Somebody's giving him some water, and you can see the battlefield kind of in the background, the soldiers and the tank in the back. And then on the back is the address and the stamp. And then here is the actual letter. These portions, which are dark, are actually redacted areas. So they would be places where maybe my great-grandfather would have written where they were located, or he could have written something about what he was doing, and they would have redacted all of that information to as not give away information about where they were located. So many of these letters look very similar. Some of them are folded into each other like a triangle, which was really interesting. And then in addition to all of the letters, there was also many postcards inside. And lots of them had poems, or like this one, it had Russian songs on them. So once I received this gift, I knew, I felt like it was like a turning point for me. And I knew that I had something that was really incredible, and I could really get all of those details of what really happened. And I would be able to piece more of that story together. So I spent a few weeks with a older Russian friend of mine who is like a grandmother to me. And she sat with me each and every day for a few hours, and she translated each letter into English. The way that they're actually written, even my husband, who was born in Russia and learned how to read in Russian, couldn't even read them because it was such a fine script. He couldn't even read them. Once I went through and had them all translated by her, I took them to somebody else who translated all of the portions that were Yiddish, and she helped me understand all of those Yiddish portions. But after reading these, I truly understood how much firsthand, how much my great-grandfather really loved my great-grandmother. And that love that they had was so pure and unwavering and so incredibly obvious. And my mother had always told me that he loved her dearly and sort of doted over her, but I didn't realize it until I read all of those letters. All right. Let's see. All right. So next I'm going to read one of the translated letters from Abraham. It's one of my favorites. Hello, my Raisa, Luba, and Sophia. I can write to you that I am alive and well. I am writing to you today the second letter. One I sent to the post office of the other address, and this one to the second address. I have waited 4 days and have not received a letter from you. Did something happen again that you stopped writing? I ask you to please write to me every day. If Mother has no time, Luba, you write to me. And if Luba is busy, Sophia, you write to me then. If you don't want me to worry, please send me letters every day. Raisa, write to me your health and the health of the girls. Don't worry about me. I am feeling good. Dearest Raisa, I am hoping that soon we will see each other. We have defeated 70% of the Nazis, and this month we will defeat the remaining 30%. And then we can return to our motherland. I am lonely without you, waiting for your response. Kisses. January 7th of 1943. So many of the postcards and letters are very similar. He pleads with her in every letter to please write me more and more letters every day, to that he misses her and he loves her. And it was interesting how he would write 2 letters. So he would sometimes write a postcard and a letter, and they would be dated the exact same. They would have the exact same information, but he would send one to the post office like address, and then he would send one to a different address just to make sure that she would receive it. So it's very sweet. Many of the letters, he would say that he was He had just returned home. It was 1 a.m. and he couldn't go to sleep until he wrote her a letter, or that he was invited to go eat with his comrades, but instead he wanted to write her a letter. So I thought that they were very great. Let's see. Next is, I want to share this one postcard because it's, again, it's one of my favorites. This is this postcard here. You can see it on the screen. And I'm going to go ahead and read it to you. So, I recall this memorable evening when your scarf fell from your shoulders, how you saw me off and promised to keep this blue scarf always. And even though you're not with me today, my dear, my love, I know that you still wrap lovingly this blue scarf around the bedhead. When I receive your letters, I hear your voice so full of life, and between the lines, the blue scarf appears before me again. And often during the fight, your figure accompanies me. I feel you close to me with your loving eyes. You never leave my side. How many precious scarves do we carry in our trench coats? We remember tender words and young girls' shoulders amidst the sufferings of the fight. We fight for them, our beloved for whom we long so much. The soldier fires his machine gun for this blue scarf which rested once on beloved shoulders. And then on the back, he writes, on June 3rd of 1943, hello, my dearest, beautiful girls. I receive letters from you seldom, but I know this is because of your situation. I understand you are busy, so I am writing to you more often instead. I am sending this postcard as memory for you from the front with the poem of the blue scarf. Sending kisses to you girls and kisses to your mother for me, Abraham. So many of these postcards sort of inspired me to, write certain areas in the book. Like for instance, in the novel, Raisa wears her favorite blue scarf to remember Abraham while he's far away. The poem and the note are just a simple but powerful way of showing the longing that he has for Raisa and his girls. So this one is one of my favorites. After doing extensive research into my family to find any unknown relatives, I ended up finding a distant relative of Abraham who's still living in Minsk. And he was also very interested in his family background. So he sent me all of the information that he had. And with this, I was able to compile a family tree. So what you're seeing here is a little bit different. It's more of a family and friends tree that's directly related to the novel. So everybody in the blue and the more purple colors that's their actual names. Those are directly related to Raisa and Abraham. And then the people that are off to the side, the four women over here, they are characters from the novel. They're her friends that she made. So either they were based off of real people that were in the letters or they were fictionalized characters, but they were important parts of the Girl with the Silver Star novel. So here what we're looking at is a map that I hand painted to show the journey that she took with her girls. They traveled 2,500 miles or about 4,000 kilometers from Minsk to Kokand in Uzbekistan. Just to give you guys an understanding, that would be the equivalent distance from San Diego to the tip of New York. It's incredibly hard for me to fathom traveling that far on foot and by train, especially while fleeing from the Nazis. They lived in what amounted to cattle cars with no electricity or running water, and on the floors of train stations were where they slept or in the forest. It took them months to arrive in Kokand, and I would say that their only real saving grace was that they avoided traveling during the harsh winter months, where the temperatures are rarely going to average above 25 to 30 degrees Fahrenheit. So Luba and Sophia were only 16 and 10 years old when they, were forced to leave. And as you can imagine, they had to grow up much faster than they would have ever thought. Next, I would love to share with you the story behind my cover because it's pretty special to me. The elements of my design were inspired directly from the novel. So the fountain in the background is Stalingrad, while the train tracks depict actual events, and the fighter planes, actual events from the novel. Pictured in the middle here is my great-grandmother. This is Raisa, and this is Abraham. It is the only picture that I have of the two of them together. The original photo, as you can see on the left, was a black and white photo, but for the cover, I had it colorized. And I would say that it was taken probably about the time that they got married in 1925, I would say, in Minsk. So as I mentioned earlier, the novel has some flashback scenes that sort of take place before the war started. For instance, how Abraham and Raisa met, or their wedding, or the births of their daughters, and all of those special moments that they shared before the war started. They are sort of peppered throughout the book as a sort of, what I like to call them, like rays of light and little glimpses into the happy times. I didn't want the book to be all about their journey, and I wanted it to sort of reflect who they were together and how they lived before the war started. So one of my favorite flashbacks is a cooking scene where Raisa is actually cooking pimeni, which are dumplings, with Luba. And these passed down recipes are ones that I cook with my girls. So you can see her on the right. This is Sasha and Leah when we just made a big plate of pimeni together. And it's something that I enjoy doing with them, and I enjoy doing with my mom and my grandmother. And if you are interested, you can find these recipes on my website. There's also a recipe for plov, which is like an Uzbek rice pilaf, which is a huge favorite in my house, and it makes great leftovers, actually tastes better the second day. So I highly recommend trying it if you haven't. Next, I wanted to share some fun and sort of interesting facts that either I learned along the way while I was researching, or just fun, interesting things about the book. So first, in Uzbekistan, they drink tea out of small bowls without handles called piala, I think is how it's pronounced. They are usually painted blue because the color is considered calming and is meant to soothe while drinking the tea. The tradition is only to pour half of a piala. This is so you don't burn your fingers while you're holding the cup, and also the tea cools down faster. It's also customary to pour your guest cup first and then your own. I think it's rude if you don't do it that way there. So I thought this was an interesting little fact. Again, like I said, I love tea, so it was just something that was interesting to me. And in the novel, there is a scene where she drinks tea with her Uzbek neighbor. So that was in the book. Another interesting thing that's different, a lot of people don't know, is about New Year's in Russia and how it's celebrated. So if you look to the left picture, it is actually a picture of our New Year's tree. And the ornaments that are hanging on there are ornaments that were passed down to me by my grandmother, Luba. She loved them so much that she actually brought them with her to the United States when she immigrated from Russia. And they are hanging on my tree now 31 years later. It looks like a Christmas tree, but it is not. It is called a New Year's tree. It's different. In New Year's, it is commonly celebrated in lieu of Christmas or Hanukkah because during the communist era, religion wasn't allowed. So instead, on New Year's, they have Father Frost, which is very much like Santa Claus. We call him Ded Moroz, and he brings presents to children and puts them under the New Year's tree. Another interesting fact is, according to my mom, she remembers hearing stories about how they lived in Uzbekistan in a kibitka, or an Uzbek nomad tent. And in my book, they do live in a kibitka for a little while. And this is a picture of what it would have looked like. It was basically a hut made from clay, and the floors were lined with straw mats for sleeping. There would have been a fire pit where they would have cooked and kept warm with. There were no windows or doors and no electricity, and they would have had to get water from an irrigation ditch. So very different culture and very different. There would have been camels, and so the things that they lived through and saw would have just been a huge culture shock based on what they were used to in Belarus. Another interesting fun fact that I realized as I was writing my book is the initials of my family and their family are exactly the same. So Raisa, my name is Rachel. His name was Abraham. My husband's name is Andre. And we have two daughters, Sasha and Leah, and they had two daughters, Sophia and Luba. So it was not like we didn't make it that way. It just was happenstance. And when I started writing, it was almost like a meant to be sort of thing that just happened. The other thing that's a little interesting is Abraham was very tall, over 6 foot, and Raisa was very petite, probably about the same height as me, and I'm 4'9". And it's also the same in my family. So I am 4'9", and my husband is about 6 foot tall. So just some interesting little fun things. Next, before I talk about or share an excerpt that I want to read, I wanted to talk a little bit about this photo. I actually got it right before I published my novel, and it is one that is very dear to me. It's the only one that I have of them, of the three of them when they were so young. Raisa is in the middle, and then Sophia is in the darker clothes with the braids, and Luba is on the right with the print, floral print. And I really love this photo so much because of their expressions. I feel like it's so unusual seeing smiles in photos and at this time period, and especially from the Soviet Union, almost every photo that I see from this time, they're not smiling. So I just absolutely love this photo. So I wanted to share it with you. And now I wanted to read a portion of my novel that I feel is a powerful part that shows only one of the hardships that they really had to endure. I wanted to read this part because it was inspired by the first story that my mother told me when I asked if she knew anything about what happened to them during the war. So let me go ahead and start that. All right. And this is from chapter 5, July 1st of 1941. The train stopped often at junctions and small stations, but we never knew for how long. We quickly learned that these stops were our only chance for a bathroom break. There were no steps or ladders, and we had to jump and help each other to get on and off safely. With no time to worry about being modest, we squatted down right next to the train cars and carefully hopped our way back through a minefield of pungent piles to get back in time. The first overnight ride we had on the train seemed endless. In the last light of the day, I noticed my parents looked pale right before the sun began to set. Gita and Lyubov sat with their hands interlocked and their heads resting on one another. Hannah sat nearest to me with Oscar by her side. His brown hair fell in waves, framing his round, chubby face and brown eyes. Baba insisted that it was time to cut it, but Hannah said she could not get herself to cut his baby curls, even if he was already 5 years old. His head lay in her lap and his eyes began to close as he stared at his favorite toy snuggled tightly in his hands. It was a miniature plastic Pinocchio figurine. The doll's arms and legs moved back and forth stiffly. I could tell by the faded paint that Oscar had given the little Pinocchio a great deal of love. Sophia, Luba, and I held each other close, and I tried to close my eyes to sleep, but sleep never came. The sounds of the train, the screeching, the clacking, and the wails of the babies right next to us were a constant reminder of our dreadful surroundings. Every time I started to doze off, I was awakened again, and the night dragged on until the sound of nearby explosions jolted us from our sleep. "Mama, what is happening?" Sophia asked. "What was that noise?" Her eyes swelled with fright as the sounds grew louder. Fear ignited inside the train like a blazing fire. "They are bombs," I said, shocked creeped into my veins, sending a rush to my head. I became nauseous from the hurricane of panic and confusion all around me. The train came to a sudden halt. The doors were flung open and people started to jump out and run. Luba, Sophia, you hold on to me and don't let go. Run as quickly as you can, I said, looking into their eyes for reassurance. Luckily, we had our bags on our backs, and we ran out as quickly as the crowd in front allowed. When we escaped the train, there was no shelter to protect us. We became moving targets like deer in a meadow. The next wave of planes roared towards us, with bombs dropping around us like thunder. I didn't know what to do, so I threw the girls on the ground in front of me, and I covered them both with my body. I tasted the stench of sweat from the girls' clothes. The pounding of my heart echoed underneath our bodies. I squeezed my eyes shut and braced for the worst. We lay there until there were no more sounds except the cries of people around us. We slowly picked ourselves up and looked at each other to make sure we were unharmed. We found the rest of our family and embraced them, thanking God for our safety. I looked around and saw the carnage before us. The deceased were scattered across the field like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, with their relatives bent over them in agony. People ran and screamed in search of someone they had lost in the commotion. There were entire train cars that had been hit with bombs, and people began to help unload the deceased. Bodies littered the sides of the tracks, with no one able to properly mourn their loss and bury them. We had to keep moving, and as hard as it was, we had no choice. Mechanics checked the train cars and tracks for damage. I hoped that they were fine so we could leave, because the thought of looking at the devastation before us for much longer was unbearable. The wailing of the grieving families weighed heavily on my heart, and even then, I knew their cries would forever replay in my mind. Luckily, the tracks escaped harm, so we shuffled back onto the remaining train cars. We had plenty of space to stretch our legs. I should have been able to breathe freer, but instead I felt guilty taking up the space which was occupied by someone's loved one only hours ago. I was weak as the tingling slowly dissipated from my body. The train became quiet as people around us held their heads low to pray and take a moment of silence. I prayed for Abraham. I prayed for the girls. I prayed for the entire family. I had only one request: our lives. Once the shock subsided, a storm began to brew inside the train. People were no longer distraught. They were angry with worry. A woman clutched onto her frightened son. "Oi, my papa, 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 why did you leave us alone? Why?" she moaned in agony, willing for a response she would never receive. I stroked my hand over my necklace, feeling each rounded point underneath my sweaty fingers. I tried to close my eyes and disappear into a faraway memory, but instead they shifted from one dark corner to another, unable to escape the heartache. Another woman who sat across from us cried into her handkerchief. Her weeping echoed along with the others into a somber harmony. The constant mourning of those around us became louder in my mind as the train continued forward for hours until we arrived in Kiev. So the reason why I chose this passage was because, like I said, my mom had told me right away that there was many times that my great-grandmother had to shield the girls with her body when there was bombs falling or under those situations. So I wanted to share that because this was based on something that actually did happen that my mom had told me about. Next, I wanted to share my book trailer, and then that will be it. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and play that. All right, that's it. Oh. All right. And I think now thought we could open it up to some questions if anybody has any questions.
We do have a couple of questions that came through on the chat while you were talking. And the first one was while you were talking about Abraham in the very beginning of your conversation. And the question is, do you know where he was or what battle he was in?
I don't know the specific battles. I do know some of the general areas that he was in as I was researching, because I was able to find some documents of what like unit he was with and where he went. I know that he was in Leningrad at some point near that area. And I know that he passed away in, it is, Derevnya Medvedya. It's like an area that they call it the Bear Woods is how you would translate it to English. But so I do know the area where he passed away, but I don't know that I know all of the specific battles that he was in, but I do have some of the documents. Yes.
And the other question, part of that was, did he feel in any danger in the Russian army as he was Jewish?
I would say yes, he probably did, but he didn't have a choice. From what I gathered from when he went into the war, like when he was conscripted into the army, they didn't have a choice. They were rounding everybody up, all able-bodied men between whatever age, 18 to whatever it was, and they had to join. So the latter of not joining would have been worse than joining, I think, at that point.
And then there was another question from Lori, and she wanted to know when you were showing the pictures of the food, were the dumplings pierogis? She expressed she has a Russian Slovak on my dad's side of the family. So were those pierogis is the
Yeah,
question.
pierogi, pelmeni, that they're very pretty much the same. So pelmeni, how we eat them in the Russian way, is they're boiled, and then we eat them with sour cream on top.
And I think pierogis are similar. They're boiled too.
Yeah, I think they're pretty much the same.
Similar.
There's also different forms of pierogis, I think, and pierogi could be also with like a different type of dough slightly. But I think they're pretty similar, yeah.
Yeah. Joan says that sounds delicious. So does anyone else have some questions? You can either type it in the chat or you could raise your hand. I'm going to stop. You want to stop the share of the,
Oh, sure.
so that we can see the whole screen and see everybody? There we go.
Sure.
More questions, comments? Angelica has her hand up. Yes, do you have a question?
Hi, Rachel. It's so good to see you.
Hi.
So I was curious, how did you come up with, I think I kind of know, but with all the materials that you had, why did you decide to go with fiction versus nonfiction? And then how did you decide how that, what went in and what didn't?
That's a good question. I think that I decided to go with fiction right from the beginning because I didn't think that I had enough to be able to make it go based on all true. To be able to make it more like almost like a memoir or something like that, where it was based on her, because I just didn't have enough. I have the letters that Abraham sent to Raisa, but I don't have the letters that Raisa sent to Abraham. So I was only able to sort of read half of that story and piece together from that, in addition to those original documents. I think that had my mom been able to give me more and had known more, I think I would have maybe been able to do that. But I don't think in this situation, I was just able to piece together enough to make it fully factual. And then your other question was, sorry, what was it?
Just how did you decide what went into
What went
the
into it?
book that was
I think I had just sort of thought about what were the most important parts of what I had, everything that I had laid out in front of me, what were the most important parts. And actually like all of the information that I had from the letters, I think pretty much all of that is in one way or another in the book and displayed. And I think that the important things that my stories that my mom had told me that were passed down, even some of the things that had happened to them in Russia, it may not have necessarily happened to my great grandparents, but it might have happened to them. Those stories that really stuck out in my mind, I somehow interweave them into the novel and tried to incorporate them.
So another question came up from Susan. Did Abraham survive the war and meet up again with his family?
That's a great question. I think you might have to read the book to find that answer out. I don't want to give it away.
Um, and then another, Joan Marshall, she is just anxious to buy the book. This was a great presentation. You have a wonderful family. Thank you for doing the research and all the work it took to write this book. And then she asked, is the presentation recorded? And yes, it is recorded. And we are going to have it out on our website, the Mirowitz Center website, for you to share or you to look at again if you would like.
Very sweet. Thank you so much.
You're
And
welcome.
I appreciate it.
You're welcome. And you could share it with anybody that you would like to and promote your book and the a great
Oh, sure.
tool.
Yeah, it can be found. It can be found on Amazon. That's probably the easiest and best way to find it. And yeah, if you have any questions, you're always welcome to reach out and ask me. I'm available. You can find me on Facebook. If you want, I can also probably send out my email, but you can find me easily through Facebook.
And
There is
also
another.
on your website, you have a way to contact you as well.
Yeah, there is a way to contact me on my website. You can join my newsletter, and I can add on there a way to ask a question too. I can add that on there.
Okay. And there was a question from, not sure, how large is the immigration from Belarus still in town?
That is a great question. There is actually a very large Russian community here in St. Louis. I don't know specifically from Belarus. I know that there are a lot of Belarusians here that my parents know of, but just a Russian population community in general, yes, there is a big Russian community here. And I'm not sure why, but it just happened. I think that we have a great community here of Russians, and my parents are much more sort of integrated into the Russian community, and since they've been here for so long, a lot of people know my family, and we do get together sometimes. Big groups of us get together. My parents are typically they get together with the other people that immigrated around the same time during, the early 80s with them. So they're very close with those people.
Yeah, and she had asked that good question, but I think you just answered that do you get together as a group sometime and it
Yeah.
sounds like you do.
And somebody's asking, did I do the artwork for the book trailer? Actually, I did. Only the map I drew. The rest of the artwork, I had hired somebody to do the artwork, but then I did the animation for it, and I put it together with the music and put it all together. So I just had somebody draw all the artwork. Thank you.
Yeah, very pretty. Really great job. I think we're getting close.
Yeah, is
I'm
there
sorry.
anybody else that has a question before we say thank you to Rachel?
No, I was going to thank you, Ronnie, for joining us today from the
Oh.
Paul Brodsky Library, and I'll let you have a few words. How's that?
Well, that's fine.
Yeah.
I wanted to just thank Rachel. It was very interesting and very powerful. And the fact that you took so much time to explain to us and to carry us through and share your family with us. I'm intrigued and I can't wait to read the book. So thank
Thank
you.
you.
And on behalf of both the Muirwood Center and the Brodsky Library, we appreciate all of you attending and sharing with Rachel. And we appreciate you, Rachel, giving us your time and your knowledge. And we look forward to meeting you in person one day and
Yes.
to seeing, have you all join us for many other things that we're going to be doing with the Brodsky Library as well as with the Muirwood Center together. So thanks for your support.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. It was so wonderful to be here.
Our pleasure.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Rachel. Thank you so much. Thank you,
you.
Ronnie. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. And we really appreciate your wonderful presentation.
All right.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.